From Denver, we travel west 45 minutes into the mountains to the old Victorian mining town of Georgetown, and yet another unique train ride. The Georgetown Loop Railroad is a narrow-gauge railroad operating over a restored portion of the old Colorado and Southern narrow-gauge lines between Georgetown and adjacent Silver Plume. Pulling our train is engine number 12, which is a Shay steam locomotive. Shays get their power from turning a crankshaft instead of directly driving the wheels. Number 12 was built in 1926. It once hauled timber products in California before coming to Colorado. Departing Georgetown, we pass under the Devil's Gate Viaduct, which we will incredibly cross in just a few minutes. Making a guest appearance for one scene is engine number 40, built in 1920, which was making a test run prior to being leased to Alaska's White Pass and Yukon Railroad.
The railroad you're riding today is a reconstructed part of the old Georgetown, Breckenridge, and Leadville Railroad. For those of you not familiar with the story of the loop, it was the surveyor's answer to the problem of getting the railroad from Georgetown to Silver Plume. You see, the two towns are only 2 air miles apart, but they differ in elevation by over 600 feet. Had the track been laid straight up the floor of the valley, the grade would have been in excess of 6%, far too steep for normal railroad operating. To get away from this, surveyors laid out a route that doubled back and looped over itself. This allowed the average grade to be held to 3.5%, although it increased the distance from the old Georgetown station to Silver Plume to about 4.5 miles. The early residents of the area had called the narrow mouth of the canyon the Devil's Gate, so when they built the bridge, it naturally became the Devil's Gate Viaduct. The bridge is 300 feet long and has an 18.5-degree curve on it. Though it might look flat and level from here, it is built on a 2% grade.
The original bridge was removed in 1939. This replica was built by the Colorado Historical Society in 1973 and visually duplicates the original, although it is much sturdier. Our train is crossing over Clear Creek and the railroad tracks that we were on only minutes ago. The railroad has made a complete circle and is now looping over itself, something seen all the time in model railroads, but amazingly, this is real.
Tickets, please. Thank you very much.
This line was only a short stub-end branch line from Denver, but the railroad was very profitable in the early days, bringing mining families and supplies to the mountain communities and taking the rich ore back to the Golden and Denver area to be processed. This continued until the silver panic of 1893, when the price of silver dropped to unprofitable levels. At that time, tourism took over as the main source of revenue for the railroad. The heavy tourism continued on into the early 1900s. However, as highways were improved and more dependable automobiles were built, people began to turn to their private cars and trucks for their business and pleasure travel in the mountains. rather than taking the train. Passenger business dwindled, and in 1927 the railroad discontinued passenger service. It still ran 2 or 3 freight trains a week until the late 1930s, when there was so little business that the railroad filed to abandon the line. Their petition was granted, and in 1939 the rails and bridges from Silver Plume east to Idaho Springs were taken up and sold for scrap. The Colorado Historical Society felt this history should be preserved. The society began to rebuild the railroad starting in Silver Plume in 1973. By 1975, we were able to operate our first passenger trains, and we have run every year since then. In 1984, the new high bridge was completed, and the tracking facilities below the bridge were complete in time for the 1985 season. As we round this next curve, we'll be passing a spur track called Morning Star. Sitting on Morning Star is old locomotive number 9. This engine was built in 1884 and saw service on the Georgetown Loop over 100 years ago. It is now owned by the Colorado Historical Society, and we hope someday we'll have the funds to restore number 9 to its original condition.
We are arriving in Silver Plume and the western end of today's restored railroad. Also part of the Georgetown Loop experience is the tour of the Lebanon Silver Mine, which is adjacent to the line. Colorado was once covered with silver mines and the railroads that served them. The Georgetown Loop Railroad does a good job of bringing the old times to life for today's visitors to experience for themselves.